to all those in the chat so far. This is Dr. Berry, Patrice Berry, is that right?
Yes.
And she's a psychologist. And I invited her to talk with us about Sandra Birchmore and some of the narrative that's going around about Sandra, and victim shaming or blaming, whichever you like to call it. And I feel like Dr. Berry has a professional background where she can help us to sort of iron out why people get a little bit confused with situations like this. So off you go, Dr. Berry. Thank you so much.
All right. So, thank you again for this invitation. Glad we were able to collaborate on this very difficult case. I do think that often what can happen is that a small percentage of people, so from what I've seen, is the majority of people see this as Sandra being the victim. The majority of people see it that way. There
Yeah,
is a small
that's the feedback I've gotten too. It's the majority that understand where we're coming from.
there is a smaller group of people that I think are trying to I don't know. And sometimes I don't know that person's experience because maybe they have their own experience of infidelity in a relationship or they have their own experience of being really negative towards women because there are people that in a relationship, if something happens, they will blame the woman in the situation and give the guy or give the other person in the relationship kind of
A
a
pass.
pass.
Yeah.
So in my marriage, if my husband was unfaithful, I would have nothing to say to the other person. Absolutely nothing. I would have an issue with my husband because that's the person that I'm in a relationship with. But there are people that externalize it to that other person because they're trying to figure out because they don't want to put the blame where it really belongs. And that victim blaming, that shifting of blame, it can be really problematic. And the harm in this case started so young and it was so slow. And I also think his position of authority and power as a police officer, I think that added additional issues. I think he also made her a submissive in his dominant stance because it seemed like there was, even within their relationship, he was the one that had all of the control. And at the end, she tried to have some control, saying,
Yes.
if you don't do this, I'm going to tell your wife. If you don't, and she tried to have some aspect of control. And unfortunately, like because the right people weren't involved, the right things weren't happening, she ended up being unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah. I, I I really appreciate the way that you describe that because that's precisely the way I see it. That that she tried to gain that control, and that's where she put herself in danger. That was the turning point. That point where he realized she's going to have more control. That was what put her in danger. So I totally agree with you on that. And there's also the other aspect of maturing through to adulthood while you're being abused, which I found an interesting topic. Would you like to speak on that, perhaps?
And it wasn't just the harm that happened with him, it was also losing her mom and her grandmother. And everything just kind of happening all around, like within a year, I think her world was completely changed. And there can be where a person gets a little stuck emotionally when something like this happens.
Right. So in that same year, it escalated as well. It was kind of like they saw that vulnerability as a extra bonus, I guess you could say. And I think it was through that year that they started passing her around a bit, wasn't it?
So I haven't looked, so I don't know at what point anything like that happened. I don't know. I was aware that there are three other individuals who have denied any involvement, but we'll see.
We'll see.
But
We'll see.
I did hear, so I wasn't sure at what age the other alleged individuals got involved.
Right. I'm just speaking from having listened to one of her family members. So
Hmm.
it's not from court documents, just
Okay.
fair warning, but it
Yeah.
is from one of her family members. So there's a girl called Mizzy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mizzy, who who started talking about the Sandra Birchmore case about a year ago, and she has one of Sandra's family members come on her shows to talk about what they know of what was going on.
Okay.
And this was kind of like leading up to them having what do they call ME, have a independent ME have a second look at the records. So there's probably some things I know I don't know to be true, but I know that the family
Yeah.
thinks happened. So
Yeah. Yep.
anyway, so where do we go from there? So what are the common things that you see happening, like with victim blame? Like, I want to understand why they might disagree with me on this. So not a lot of them are saying that they why they disagree. Those who do disagree are trying to do it respectfully, and those who don't are just being political about whether it's a left wing or a right wing stance, and I just throw them in the ignore bin. I don't even bother trying to reply to them. But what are the common things that you would identify with people thinking that she played a role in the blackmail side of things, for example?
And I think she had every right. So I think she had every right to um I don't like, so that's a hard one because what she did should have been a reason for him to break up with her, to stop seeing her, to tell his wife, but not do what he did. And so that's where, from my perspective, I try to just delete the comments that are 100% on his side and that are in no way willing to learn or see anything different.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even have a conversation with that type of individual. But I've had honest questions where somebody asked me, can you explain to me how she isn't a mistress? Because I don't see her that way. I see her as a child that was groomed, and even as an adult, she was unable to get free from his coercive control, in my opinion. I have to say that for like my disclaimer. So I view her as stuck and as a victim in this situation, even once she was an adult and legally able to consent, because everything happened when she was so young. I've worked with adults that have been unable when they're if it was a parent that was harmful, if it was a sibling or a neighbor, even as an adult, sometimes they still struggled to be able to set healthy boundaries, to be able to, because maybe in the rest of their life they might have been 25 years old in the rest of their life. But when they got around that individual, they went back to being that 11-year-old that was taken advantage of. And I don't know if people really understand that sometimes that's what negative experiences like that can do. It can have a person get emotionally stuck. And some of her behavior was kind of re-traumatizing herself in a way. His relationship with her and the things he liked to do and his appetite, to me, it was not at all consensual. It wasn't about prioritizing what she wanted or what she needed. The emails and messages I've seen, it was mostly about him and what he wanted. And but that was her idea of love, and that was her idea of what a relationship was. He might have been one of the only individuals that she had a relationship with. And so I think that adds additional things. And in her mind, she might have felt special or chosen and not realized that she was the victim in this situation.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest issues, not realizing that you're a victim. And I've been through that myself. It was many, many years after my divorce before I understood that it was abusive. At the time, I didn't realize that. At the time, I thought I had some control. And because I was the one that got him to leave, that I had some control. But then I look back at it now as a grandmother, I look back at it and I think, you know what? I had to trick that guy. I had to trick him into leaving because I was so afraid of him and I was so manipulated by him that if I just came out and said, you just have to leave, that I was going to cause, violence basically. So, yeah, it was many years after the fact that before I came to realize that that was an abusive relationship. So, I do understand. Also, I guess because I met him so young and I didn't have any experience in a permanent relationship prior to that, I think that impacted my neediness, I guess, of the relationship. I look back now and I realize I don't think I ever did love him. I think I just needed him. And he filled that need because he was the traditional breadwinner. And I came from a traditional family that's very religious, and that traditional thing was just like ingrained in my upbringing. So but I look back at it now and I realize now that I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have a grip on anything. I didn't have any control in that relationship. So and that abuse went on for many years afterwards, like dealing with kids and time, who's going to have the kids, and custody battles and whatnot. So
And I'd be interested to know what, because I do believe she was in therapy, and I'd be interested to know just kind of what she was working on, because I think her therapist might end up coming into, um because if anything came out, if anything was reported in therapy. And as a therapist, when I'm working with an adult, so I work with individuals, and I've worked with individuals that are in unsafe relationships, but they have to choose to leave. So even if I was working with Sandra, we would have talked about, and that, but this is only if she was ready and willing, because I don't want the client to then become dependent on me. Because when a person decides to go, it has to be their decision.
exactly.
Because if I'm the one that said, because sometimes therapists will do that, they'll say, I can't keep working with you if you stay in this relationship. Like there are therapists that will say things like that. And for
Yeah,
me, what I do is I build their self-esteem. I build their ability to set boundaries, their ability to understand healthy versus unhealthy dynamics, and then their understanding of, wait a minute, this might not be normal. And we just kind of take this gradual approach. And then if they ever do decide to go, because I think it was Miss Jessica that said that one of the most unsafe times for someone in Sandra's shoes is when they decide to leave, is if they decide to start setting boundaries, if they decide to stand up for themselves, things can get unsafe. And so being able um, to take a look at that, I think that can be really helpful.
yeah, it's very difficult because I know nobody could have told me that this relationship's unhealthy. No one could have told me that. And even after the divorce, and I knew it was all out of whack, you still couldn't have told me then. I had to come to that decision myself. So I completely understand where you're coming from there. Just to throw this question up for you, Dr.
Yes.
Berry,
Mhm.
what is your opinion on Farwell's personality, and why did he do that instead of just breaking up with her?
And so I don't know him personally, just in general, an individual in his shoes. Sometimes they're drawn to a career like being a police officer because they are the authority and they don't feel like people can tell them what to do. So sometimes there are some antisocial type traits, but some people take it to a psychopathic where they manipulate, harm, where they aren't safe with people. I'd be interested to see if he did have a psychological evaluation, if there were traits of the dark triad, and that would be that Machiavellianism, narcissism, and then also that kind of sadistic, those kind of dark traits.
Yeah,
And that I would be interested to see if those things were present. And she was evidence, and the baby was going to be evidence of his crime. Because if it ever came out, because her friend reported that the affair started when she was 15, because that's it's my understanding he started freaking out when the friend made the report to the police station. And so I think he wanted to be able to deny and make her look crazy, make her look like there was something wrong with her when
yeah,
she wasn't. She was, I don't believe at all. So the cause of death was that she did something to herself. I do not believe. All the signs point that she was planning for the future, but she was asking him questions like, should I put your name on the birth certificate? And there were things that were going to disrupt his marriage. His other, I think his wife had a child the same day.
yeah.
He,
I think it was
yeah.
number three child actually. So yeah, sure. And he could see that that he would be losing control over some things if he let her do some of the things that she wanted to do.
Mhm,
So yeah, and I completely agree that that most dangerous time is when you're fixing to leave. So
mhm,
somehow, even though I didn't recognize that I was a victim, I understood that I was going to be putting myself in danger. So I had to trick him into leaving. So
mhm. And I call those sneaky boundaries. And if I'm working with a client, and if that's the safest way for them to leave. So sometimes we talk because we know if there are children, custody battles, and the person doesn't even want the children, but it can become this battle to just create more drama and strife for the individual that they're still trying to control because they're just an antagonistic, they're just kind of a difficult person. And so sometimes we talk about, okay, what's a way that we can kind of make them think this might be their idea, or how can, like, you set this boundary, but this isn't a safe person where you can just tell them, I don't want to be here anymore. Because to me, in any relationship, I should have the choice to leave if I want to, if I don't want to stay. Because then it's kidnapping. It's like I'm being held hostage. Like that's anybody should have the choice. And I think it's more important when I choose to remain. I choose to stay. It's because of the love I feel and blah blah blah. Like that's why I'm here. It's not because I can't or I'm afraid of what'll happen if I do.
yeah, I think that's an important message for anybody out there who's not sure whether they're in one of these predicaments or not, but to ask yourself, can I leave? Am I afraid to? If you're
And
afraid to, then you're probably in one of those relationships.
and sometimes what ends up happening is that the person, sometimes it's financial too, so I don't want to minimize that. Sometimes I've worked with people that wanted to leave, desperately wanted to leave, but they had to save up the money. They weren't able to. I
Right.
would like to answer the Libby 3 question. Hi, Dr. Barry. Why did he unalive her? Was it for control? And he wanted to avoid consequences, and he got away with it until the federal investigation.
I think too, in some part, he couldn't trust her anymore. Like
Mhm.
she had told people what was going on, and those people had rung his work, and he'd become aware of that. And I think that's where it escalated to murder from that point, where he realized she's not the only one that knows. Now other people know, and he can't trust her anymore.
And I don't think he thought it would ever become a federal issue. So this had to jump his local department, and this is a federal. So the federal government is the one that came in to, and they're the ones that are, his local department isn't the one handling this investigation. The federal government is. And so that can sometimes point to Because I think the federal government was investigating possible like corruption in Canton and issues and things, and so the fact that the federal government had to come in, he did get away with this for a period of time. He's just now going to face, the trial for her to hopefully get justice.
Yeah, he really did think he was going to get away with it, and that's sometimes half the reason for murder. Can I get away with this? I think I can, and off
And
you go.
And I would like to highlight because Evil Queen said that Sandra wanted a happily ever after. And I don't think she knew that that was never going to happen. When somebody does this to you, they will do that to somebody else. Does that make sense? Because that's where I think when people meet someone and they're like, they think, oh, like, because he could have done this to another little girl. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that Sandra considered that there might be others. Like I didn't see in the text that she.
But I'm saying like if she became his wife, I think he would have wanted something else. Does that make sense?
Yes, I get what you're saying now.
Mhm.
It slipped out of my head that he was
You're good.
already with his wife, but like even that, she was 13 when he started grooming her. She's 15 when they do the roo. I'm wondering where the wife came into this because
And he married her after. So I think they had he
that's what I
SA'd her
thought.
for the. It was April, and him and his wife got married in May of the same. Like it was first time with her was April. He got married to his wife in May.
So it was only a month. So he was already seeing his wife and
They were
already
already
engaged to
engaged.
his wife. What when he
Sometimes people
decided?
think there's a protection, like, oh, nobody would even look at me because I have this. Because sometimes there's this facade, there's this
Yeah,
Jekyll and Hyde. There are these two sides
yeah,
where nobody thinks. Because sometimes I've seen that happen with some other cases where the person is married to a beautiful person and like they seem to have a happy marriage, and yet they were still harming people, like they were harming children, they were still doing the other things.
yeah. With this question here, I just my first sort of reaction to that would be that they can turn it on and off. That's part of the manipulation that you were just describing. Like no one would suspect me because I've got a wife and now she's pregnant or we're married and now we're going through this early part stage of our, so no one's going to suspect me. And I think he can turn it on and off,
Mhm.
but you might think differently. That's just my first sort of thought on
Yep. Yep.
that. And please do ask questions, chat. Dr. Berry's quite happy to answer them. Um, Thank you so much, Idea Delight. Um, what do you think about the trauma bonding involved with this, Dr. Berry?
And I think the slow grooming makes it even more difficult. And then I watched Surviving the Survivor, and they had a expert on that kind of researches, and she wrote a book on these types of issues, and just how predators like what's alleged here, they often pick vulnerable people. And so that's where I think teaching kids consent early. I heard somebody say recently that often kids that have a good understanding um, about their body, so like they know the correct names of their body, kids that have a good understanding of what's healthy and what's not, that often they won't be the target. It's often people that that aren't. So I have a lot of information over on my channel that goes into trauma bond a little bit more. Did you want to go ahead and ask the next question? Oh wait,
Sure.
sorry. Yeah.
I think
So
we
I
kind
think
of
there.
answered. I think
Okay.
we kind of answered it.
Mhm.
for what is a trauma bond, that you're saying that you've got some videos over there to go and look at.
Mm,
So if I can get a mod to post Dr. Berry's channel, I know you've already done it a couple of times, Karen, but if you could just do that one more time. And I think you already answered this question. Do you think he exhibited any of this deviance towards his wife?
we may, and also within a healthy, safe relationship, there can be people that engage in play consensually, and so I don't know what. Um, but I know that what happened with Sandra was not consensual because of her age, and she did not have the ability to consent. And so that's kind of where I stand with that.
Yep.
Um,
Um, what was I going to ask next? Someone talked about the DuckDuckGo. That's the
yes,
author that you're talking about was on
yes,
STS. Yep, yep. Now I'm pretty sure that's where I first ever saw your name come up. Was a chat comment on STS,
cool.
and I went, "Oh, I'm going to go look at that channel," and that was where I saw your Birchmore video. I also saw a couple of other videos that you did as well. So that was how I discovered you, by watching STS. I don't always agree with Joel on a lot of things. Well, I won't say a lot of things, just some things. I don't always agree with Joel, but I always agree with his mum. I've never found anything that his mum has ever said where I can go, scratch, scratch. Not sure about that. His mum's a lovely lady. But there's been a few things where I'm a little disagreeable where Joel's concerned. For one, like that there's no crossover between this case and the Karen Reed case. You know, I completely disagree with him. Totally the opposite thoughts in my book. Did you follow the Karen Reed case at all?
Yes.
Yep, yep. So in Joel's opinion, there's no connections here. That it's conflation to be making any connections here, but these are all the same officers that were involved in investigating both, and that Guarino missed 35,000 texts, in the Birchmore case, and he's also missed all this other stuff in Karen Reed's case. So I do see that there is some crossover.
Mhm.
So, Baker, hello. Dr. Berry has given us some precious little of her time today. So I'm going to give her the floor to say her hoorays, and we'll continue on with um, talking with the chat when Dr. Berry's done.
Awesome, awesome. And so, thank you again for this invitation. I think it's really important to just talk about the um, just how this process can go. I would have never thought to not be able to report it to the police department. He did end up. I think he withdrew from the police because they found out about what happened, and he was let go. He lied about it, but that didn't stop him from necessarily. It didn't provide any consequences, and so I really just hope that there's able to be justice within that case. And I'm at Dr. Patrice Berry on YouTube, and there I cover court cases, also some entertainment news, and then sometimes I just do general educational videos. I'm glad to get to connect here, and I hope y'all enjoy. All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berry. We appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
And please do, peeps, go over there and subscribe to Dr. Berry's channel.